Denise Gwen, reading aloud for you from my novel, His Christmas Eve Proposal. Book 3 in the Medicine Women of Alaska. Chapter 26. The problem was, of course, he'd already fallen in love with her. It was too late for him to try to protect his feelings. If she left Gnometown, and by implication, him, he didn't know how he'd ever recover from yet another heartache. Drew fetched his medical kit and rummaged through it. "What's up?" Naomi asked with a suspicious frown. "You need to be examined," he said. "If you've encountered high-altitude sickness, then I need to find out right this minute and get you medevaced off this mountain." "Oh, all right, fine. Go ahead and examine me, but you're not going to find anything wrong." "Thank you. I appreciate your cooperation," he said dryly. "You know, you're just like what my dad used to say about doctors." "Oh, what's that?" "We make the worst patients." At this, she managed a wry smile. "Oh, well." He put the stethoscope buds into his ears and moved around behind her. "Okay," she said at last. "Okay, what?" He placed the stethoscope knob against her left back rib. "Inhale, hold your breath, then let it out slowly." "You were right about your first assessment of me." "My first assessment?" "As to my being a surgeon." "Oh." This was something new. Was she admitting to something? He remained silent. "You were right. I'm a trauma surgeon. In fact, I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon." He removed the stethoscope and stood there, stunned. "You are?" "Yes, I am. Well, I was. I was a cardiothoracic surgeon." "Why'd you hide that from me?" he asked, moving the knob to the lower right back shoulder blade. "Inhale and let your breath out." "I wanted to keep my history a secret. I don't remember anymore why I thought it was a good idea, but I did." "Okay, now I need to check your lungs on your chest side." "Okay," she said, and turned around and faced him. He placed the knob under her left breast and was reassured at the clean lung sounds as she inhaled and let her breath out for him. Her heart thudded below his fingers. "Okay," he said, "lung sounds are clear." He pulled his stethoscope off his neck and tossed it to one side. "Good to go," she chirped, and he stopped her cold in her tracks with a hard look. "What?" she asked. "Hold on there, lady. I'm not done." "What more is there?" she demanded. "This," he said, and held up her right hand and examined it. "Your nail beds are exhibiting signs of cyanosis, and your breathing is labored." "I've got mountain sickness?" "You do. It happens a lot to people who are new to this kind of altitude." He released her hand, put his fingers under her chin, and tipped her head back. "Let me see your tongue." She stuck her tongue out, and he studied her tongue and her lips. Her lips were so close to his, so close that he could kiss her right now if he wanted, and he did, but he was conducting a medical exam. Stay professional. Her skin, her face, her chin were so soft, so very soft. He longed to run his fingers up and down her neck, her cheeks, her lips. "Seriously?" she asked. "I've got cyanosis?" "Yes, I'm afraid so. You must descend right away." "Descend?" Her eyebrows quirked upwards. Get down off this mountain right now, young lady, and I'm ordering you to drink lots and lots of water. He held his hand out for her, and she didn't quite seem to know how to respond until she realized and put her hand in his, and he pulled her up to her feet. I must be in terrible physical shape, she said sadly. You're in wonderful physical condition, he said. It takes time to become acclimated to mountainous altitudes. Do you know why it takes so long for hikers to climb Mount Everest? Because they keep falling off the mountain? Ha ha, very funny. He took a small measure of comfort at her small joke. At least you're cracking wise. No, it's because they need to give their bodies time to adjust to the altitude. And as hikers climb the mountain, the oxygen in the air gets extremely low. And they have to stay at the camps for weeks at a time until their lungs adjust to the high altitude. Then they ascend to the next camp and hang out there for another few weeks to give their bodies a fighting chance for when they reach the summit and the low percentage points of oxygen. My goodness, she said. Why, I didn't know that. You learn something new every day, he said. And despite his efforts to avoid getting drawn into intimacy with her, he had a sudden impulse to reach forward and tap the tip of her nose. And he did so and grinned down at her. She smiled up at him. And he realized he'd better pull back before he got himself into trouble. Here, he said, removing his fleece jacket, put this on and I'll walk you out to my truck. Okay, she said reluctantly, and she stood up and he nodded for her to lead the way. I want to watch your gait as you walk to the truck to make sure you don't lose your balance and fall. That's fine, she said and chuckled. You want to make sure I don't lose my balance and fall. It's one of the symptoms of cyanosis, he said. I'll just have to take your word for it. He smiled to himself. She was being a smart aleck with him, but unbalanced walking was one of the most significant symptoms of cyanosis, vertigo, and dizziness. He got her all settled into his truck, snuggled her in, and handed her the key. Here, turn on the engine and keep yourself warm. Aren't we heading down the mountain? I need to help finish cleaning up. And once I check with the paramedics and make sure we've got everybody taken care of, I'll come back, but I want you to crank up the heat. I want to come with you, she said. I want to help. No, he said firmly. You're staying put. Okay, she said, a tad resentfully. Once he felt assured that she wasn't going to jump out of the truck and follow him, he walked back up the mountainside to the makeshift hospital to check with the other paramedics. He found his brother. Paul looked at him with a furrowed brow. Hey, where's Naomi? I put her in my truck to warm her up. She's exhibiting early symptoms of altitude sickness, and I want to get her checked out to make sure she hasn't developed high-altitude cerebral edema. Uh-oh, Paul said, and patted Drew's shoulders. Well then, I think you'd better head on out of here and take care of that little lady of yours. As Drew turned on his heel and walked out of the tent, he muttered, She's not my little lady. He didn't dare claim her. She wasn't his for the having. Keep me posted, okay? Paul called after him. I sure will, Drew called over his shoulder. Thanks, bro. He walked back to his pickup truck, and as he climbed up and into the truck and slid behind the wheel, a blast of hot air soothed his face. He was glad that she'd listened to him and cranked up the heat. Okay, he said. I'm going to drive us slowly down the mountain just in case you get sicker with altitude sickness. She shivered. You want the heat cranked up a bit more?" he asked. No, she stammered, and he laughed and reached for the heat control and cranked it up. At last her shivering stopped. "That was one terrifying avalanche," she said. "Yes, it was, but I've seen much worse than that." "Are you kidding me?" "Not at all," he said. "It happened back when I was 12. It was in Huna, which is east of here. An avalanche decimated the village, and my dad headed up the mountain with Paul, who was 16. I wanted to go with them, but my mother made me stay home with her." "You were only a little boy of 12. I can understand why your mother made you stay home." He grinned. "My mother liked to coddle me." "She wasn't coddling you. She was being a good, caring mother." "My mom and I were sick with worry all night long. I had no idea if Paul or my dad were coming back. It was terrible. A lot of people were lost." "Oh dear, that's so sad," she said. He glanced over at her, and his heart swelled with sudden love. What a little trooper she was. "I'm falling asleep here," she said. "Go ahead and sleep," he said. "You need the rest." As he drove down the mountain, she dozed, and he remained silent, considering as he drove into the town. He slowed to a crawl when he reached their clinics, but then decided it'd be better to take her directly to his cabin. If he stopped, he'd have to awaken her to get her apartment key, and then he'd have to settle her into her bed. And he didn't like the idea of her sleeping alone. He wanted to keep an eye on her. It'd be much better from a purely clinical standpoint, and he knew he was rationalizing, but he'd feel a whole lot better about her condition if he settled her safely in at his home. Sure, tell yourself that. Drew knew where her life was headed. He could see it now, even as he drove her in this cozy silence back to his home. She'd missed the excitement of cardiothoracic surgery too much, and she'd eventually leave Gnometown to find a bigger, splashier place to practice medicine. The worst part was that he couldn't follow her because of his compelling duty to stay and continue his father's medical practice. Naomi didn't even stir awake when he made the sharp turn down the gravel-strewn driveway, and as he bumped over the road, she continued sleeping. He pulled up in front of the house, and she was still asleep, but he had to check her fingernails one more time. He picked up her left hand and examined the nail beds. Yes, thank God, the blue had all but disappeared. She was getting better. A wave of relief washed over him, and he threw the gear into park, killed the engine, and jumped from the driver's side door. She didn't stir. Drew gently opened the front passenger door, eased her out, and carried her up the short walk to the front door. He carried her into his bedroom and gently laid her on the bed. He pulled off her boots, then eased off her jacket, gloves, and woolen cap. He tucked the coverlet up under her chin. Her eyelids fluttered open briefly, but closed again as she fell into a deep sleep. He stood over her sleeping form for a long moment, standing vigil, watching as she slept. His heart ached as he gazed down at her. He'd like nothing better than to lie down beside her and draw her into his arms. He longed for human companionship for his Naomi. He sighed deeply and walked to the door, leaving it ajar so he could hear if she called out.